So in this video, we're going to talk about our understanding of DevOps, and hopefully you've watched the previous video where I really just talked about what is DevOps. But since we're trying to learn DevOps in the context of testing and the idea of these software development paradigms, and I use that word to talk about things like Agile and Waterfall, which is what we're going to talk about in this video. But we really need to bring it kind of full circle. What are all these things? How do they connect? What is going on here? So we know that DevOps is kind of the latest evolution in a history of changes to software development. And it really goes from Waterfall to Agile, Agile to DevOps. Each step has created a corresponding change in the role and activities of the software developer, the IT operations person, the project manager, the tester. The steps may not be distinct in every organization, but for simplicity, we can consider them separately just so that we understand what that role should look like. So if you're not sure what waterfall is, in a waterfall environment, testers have sole ownership of test strategy and execution. And they really focus on their own test ideas, independently exploring the software, locating, and then reporting the problems that testers discover. And so through this process, they work with developers, business analysts, designers, test managers, and others. And there's a comfort, I think, in knowing that testing as an activity kind of belongs to a group, right? Someone is thinking about it full time. And so as a tester, like testing is the role and identity in the team. So, it's these analogies, right? Waterfall is like building a house, right? One stage finishes and then we build the next. So like you have to put down a foundation before you can put up walls, and you have to put up walls before you can put up a roof, and you have to put up walls before you can put in plumbing. And so one step after another, and that's why it's called waterfall, because we can picture it like this dropping down to one stage to the next. And then DevOps, it's kind of like tending a garden. But I don't like this analogy. People use this analogy. This continuous adaptation and improvement. So like you go out to your garden and you see like your tomatoes look a little yellow today. Like the leaves aren't great. And you're like, oh no, but like the celery's fine and the parsley is fine. And you're like, okay, well, I can just focus on this one area that I know needs my attention. And so you can kind of think of them like that. And so when we think about, like how do these areas work together? So in their approach, DevOps is using kind of that more agile and iterative process, whereas Waterfall is using a linear or sequential process. And so we can see here like dev flow, why we have that continuous integration, the continuous delivery, waterfall step by step. Speed, like for DevOps, we're looking at like fast and frequent, and we, always be building. But with waterfall, these slow cycles of like everything has to go through every step of the process before you can deliver. Flexibility, right? Obviously, DevOps has high flexibility in contrast to Waterfall having low flexibility. Feedback for DevOps, because we're doing that monitoring, is real time. Whereas with Waterfall, you may not have all of the pieces until you get through the stages. The team formation in DevOps is cross-functional, which means we have all of these people, developers, business people, designers, managers, testers, ops, all working together. And in Waterfall, like we have all of these kind of segregated and separated departments. Testing is automated in DevOps, where in Waterfall, it is manual. There is a person doing those testing steps. Deployment in DevOps is frequent, where in Waterfall, you plan big releases around these big cycles, and then you release once everything is done. So you're not doing these frequent little releases. The risk in DevOps really, that's where a lot of businesses focus, is that DevOps gives us that early detection, whereas Waterfall, you may not realize there's a problem until a lot later. And so DevOps is heavy on the automation. We're going to talk a lot about tools, whereas with Waterfall, we have minimal automation. So in this agile environment, right, DevOps really takes this idea of agile development because agile challenges our definition of testing and ownership of testing as an activity. It changes the scope and pace, and it really engulfs the whole development team. And then DevOps pushes this even further. So the entire development team is actively engaged more widely within their organization, beyond the roles that are involved in development of those that support it, right? So operations infrastructure and monitoring and customer support and analytics. And this change broadens the network of people who collaborate, which will further extend the boundaries and nature of testing. So again, a comparison, right, between DevOps and Agile. So DevOps, the focus is delivery, right? Deliver, always be releasing, always be building. Agile is focused on development at the direction of the project manager. So the project manager is kind of the stoplight or controlling the flow of the work, whereas DevOps is like go, go, go. The goal is stability in DevOps, where in Agile, we have this like speed versus feedback model. So we want to go as fast as possible, but we also want feedback to know if we're doing things correctly. That's why they work in those sprints. Maybe you've heard that term before. But DevOps, the goal is to keep things moving forward and automate the process to remove the areas of risk and human touch so you can get stability. DevOps, as far as scope, is end-to-end. Everything in the entire project gets touched. Whereas with Agile, they focus on development, QA, and then our project management, project operations. Kind of siloed out. They do work together. They do sometimes meet together, but with DevOps, like we're trying to glue everyone together, right? Dev and ops. So with our release, right, remember we do that continuously, whereas Agile works in sprints. So sprints are these short periods of time in which you're completing a set number of tasks. And then at the end of that, then you can do that evaluation and review cycle. But DevOps is kind of always going. Automation, again, DevOps high. Agile has lower automation. Feedback, we're trying to get that from our systems. And in Agile, you're trying to get that from your users. Agile is very user-focused. And so, they're doing the user testing and the focus testing and getting that feedback. But in DevOps, they really just get it from monitoring. So the culture in DevOps, right, cross-functional, cross-IT, Agile is really only dev team focused. The ops people are not involved. And so tools-wise, right, we've talked about a few of these, Jenkins, Azure, things like that. In Agile, you're using project management software, so like Jira and Scrum tools. And so I'm not saying you can't use DevOps and say that you're in an Agile environment, because I would imagine most places think that, but we do want to understand the nuance of the differences, right? So in DevOps, with this testing mindset, DevOps emphasizes automation, speed, and reliability. And in order to achieve that, testing is built into every stage of the development and deployment pipeline and not just done at the end. So we have a lot of different types of testing that we do, and you've probably heard of some of these before, just maybe if you've looked into QA roles or as a software developer, you've thought, like, hey, maybe instead of writing code, I want to write tests, or you maybe even had to write your own unit tests. So we're going to talk more in depth about each one of these pieces of testing as we go and kind of how it works. But unit tests, those are the individual pieces of code, usually written by developers, based around the specifications or the output of the code, and kind of run right then, without checking it in, without deployment, without automation. Integration tests ensure different components work together. So integration tests are going to happen along that automation cycle, and they are going to make sure that as different component teams check in their work, that those components work together and that there are no problems in cross-component communication. Functional tests, also sometimes called acceptance tests, tests that the software works from an end user perspective. So just like in Agile, when I said Agile is really focused on the user, we do want to make sure that we're getting that user piece. So we don't want to turn out software that the user doesn't like or doesn't want to use, or maybe somehow we missed a key idea on how the software is actually going to be implemented and used by our customer. And then we release it and they're like, that's not what I wanted at all. So acceptance testing, functional testing, makes sure that those user workflows are in place. Security tests, right? We scan for vulnerabilities during development. We check for, can I use SQL injection, and can I, use cross-site scripting, and do I have packages that haven't been updated? Those kinds of things. Performance tests ensure that the system works under load. So this is less sometimes about code and more about your ops. How is your system set up? How does it scale? What kind of platforms is it running on? We're going to go into those containers, like what kind of containers are you using and how do those work when we have to scale it up. Smoke tests are quick tests to verify core functionality after a deployment. So once you've rolled it out, we run a smoke test sometimes to make sure that things are working as intended. And we call them smoke tests because, when you smell smoke, you see fire, or something like that. Regression tests really confirm that new changes have not broken existing features. So regression kind of means going back to, so we verify nothing broke, right? We can go back and say, oh yeah, we rolled out that new feature, but we broke this other feature. You don't want that. So that's what regression testing is going to tell you. And again, we're going to dig into each one of these in more depth. Because again, we're not just learning DevOps, we're also learning about testing and these roles together. So there's a nice graphic here to kind of look at how this works, because I think a lot of people have maybe seen that software development lifecycle that's like, plan, build, release, deploy, monitor, test, right? The traditional software development lifecycle that maybe you've seen in a Scrum environment. But this is, we're test everywhere, right? Automated tests are triggered every time code is pushed as part of that CI/DI process. Dev and ops are working together to build, plan, branch, code, and then release, deploy, operate, monitor. And then we're testing throughout that whole cycle for various things. So since we trigger a test every time we push, failures in those tests are going to block bad deployments. Having those tests automated means that every time someone checks something in, it passes all of those checks and it does not get merged into the code base if it doesn't. So therefore, we're increasing our quality. And some tools that we'll look at: JUnit, Selenium, Postman, Jest, Cypress, SonarQube, different things that are often used. Again, DevOps sounds like you've got to learn a ton of things, and test automation, you got to learn all these tools. But it really just has to go back to what stack are you using, what platforms are you on, what tool fits best for your environment, because a lot of these tools, they do the exact same things. We just use them under different conditions. So that DevOps testing mindset, right? We call it shift left. So thinking about that traditional software development lifecycle, we start testing earlier in the development cycle and we fail fast, right? We know immediately if there's a problem. We can catch those problems easier and fix them, quickly and immediately. And we know when there are problems versus like that Agile waterfall process where we have this step-by-step. We could get into step 4 of our process before we realize there's a problem, and then we have to back all the way up and start over. So failing fast means things can move faster. We test everything from code to infrastructure, our servers, our cloud setups, everything. And then we measure and monitor, because again, if we aren't measuring, if we aren't monitoring, if we aren't using real-time data to improve test coverage, we are not going to catch issues in the process or in production. So everyone needs a testing strategy, but how you experience DevOps culture really kind of helps shape, your existing testing approach or how you implement your existing testing approach into the idea of DevOps. So you have this vision of DevOps in your organization, how you start to collaborate beyond the development team. And so leaders really have to have this vision for DevOps and how testing fits within it. Because if you don't have a testing strategy, you're actually setting yourself up for some serious failure. We don't want buggy code. We don't want delays in our CI/DI pipeline process. We don't want that lost trust that happens when teams are not working well together. And if only the developers are testing and the servers are breaking, that's going to create friction between the teams. We can start small. We can just go with unit tests and then start working on integration tests and then start working on smoke tests. We do not have to roll out an entire testing plan from scratch just because, right? So we can grow with our pipeline maturity if we're just getting started in this process or we're not really understanding how all of our tests are going to fit together. Then, we can start small. It's totally okay. So this DevOps and testing analogy as we wrap up here. So if DevOps is your kitchen, where you have your oven and your tools and your pans and all of your equipment, then testing is your recipe. It's your quality control. And without a recipe to follow, right, that's your testing plan, it's a hit or a miss. You're not going to get consistent results just implementing DevOps. And that's maybe the point that I'm trying to get to here is, an organization that rolls out DevOps without a clear testing strategy is not going to get what DevOps promises. And so DevOps can strengthen relationships between people who are using any methodology. It can improve reliability of releases. That could mean reducing the number of support patches for a product or decreasing the outage window that users experience. More frequent releases could be a target that your organization wants. And it doesn't matter. In a non-agile environment, a release might be monthly or yearly. And really, so DevOps doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get what we're saying you're going to get without testing. And testing is kind of, conspicuous in its absence from some literature about DevOps because by nature, the focus is on developers and operations, and that tends to make the testers nervous about their role. And so the people who are shaping these communities, and as you learn more about DevOps and as you grow as a developer, think about the highlight of testing. Even if you're not from a testing background, it doesn't mean that testing isn't happening. We need it to be a pervasive activity through development and not considered notable. So I hope you've enjoyed this and you understand a little bit more about how these two pieces fit together and how we're going to approach our learning of DevOps and testing so that we really get a rounded approach as a software developer. Maybe you are wanting to go into one of these roles, and so you can move forward with your career with a little more insight into what all of these things mean. So thank you so much. I'll see you next time.